The stars shimmered outside the viewport, stretching endlessly across the void. Captain Alara stared out at the familiar sight, but this time it felt different. The weight of war hung in the air, settling heavily on her shoulders. Space, once a place of infinite wonder and promise, had become a battleground, and her ship, Resolute, was now a weapon in humanity's desperate struggle for survival. The war had come swiftly. What had begun as a cold standoff with the alien coalition, an alliance of advanced races that had long controlled vast sectors of the galaxy, had exploded into full-scale conflict. The coalition viewed humanity as a threat, an unpredictable species that expanded too quickly, disrupted delicate power balances, and refused to respect boundaries. Alara had seen the signs early on, during her exploratory missions near coalition space. The alien patrols grew more frequent, their messages more curt. And then came the attack, a coalition strike fleet annihilating a human outpost on the edge of the galaxy. It was brutal and sudden, leaving no survivors. That was a declaration of war. Now, Resolute and its crew were on the front lines. The ship was one of the most advanced in the human fleet, sleek and deadly, equipped with the latest in shield technology and firepower. But even with its cutting-edge design, Alara knew they were outmatched. The coalition had been traversing the stars for millennia, their technology far beyond anything humanity could muster. The only advantage humans had was their unpredictability, their ability to think outside the rigid systems of the coalition races. Alara turned from the viewport and faced her crew. They were busy at their stations, focused but tense. The ship hummed with the sound of machinery, a comforting white noise that reminded Alara that, for now, they were safe. Her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Soren, approached. He was younger, eager to prove himself, and untested in real combat. His face was set in a mask of calm, but Alara could see the fear lurking beneath. Everyone was afraid. How could they not be? "Captain, we're approaching the rendezvous point," Soren said, his voice steady. Alara nodded, stepping toward the command console. "Good. Let's hope the fleet made it." Soren's brow furrowed. "Do you think they will, Captain?" Alara didn't answer right away. She had her doubts. The coalition was faster, better equipped, and always seemed to be one step ahead. But they had to hope. The fleet was their only chance at striking back, at showing the coalition that humanity wouldn't be crushed so easily. "We'll find out soon enough," Alara said. "Prepare the ship for combat readiness." "I don't want any surprises." Soren gave a sharp nod and moved off to relay the orders. Alara took a deep breath, her eyes drifting to the star map on the console before her. The Resolute had been sent to the Outer Rim to meet with the remnants of the human fleet that had survived the first wave of coalition attacks. They were outgunned and outnumbered, but with the right strategy, they might have a chance. Alara couldn't shake the nagging doubt that gnawed at her mind. Every report, every analysis, every simulation they ran showed the same thing: defeat. The coalition was simply too strong. But what the simulations couldn't account for was human tenacity, their refusal to give up even when all hope seemed lost. That, Alara reminded herself, was what they were counting on. The rendezvous point came into view, a barren system on the edge of known space, far from any inhabited worlds. As the Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel, the sight that greeted them was both heartening and grim. Dozens of human ships hung in the void, their hulls battered and scorched from recent battles. Some were warships, designed for combat, while others were repurposed freighters and civilian vessels, hastily converted into makeshift gunships. Alara's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sorrow. These were the survivors, the last hope for humanity. They had come from all corners of the galaxy, drawn together by the desperate need to stop the coalition's advance. But as she scanned the fleet, she knew they weren't enough. The coalition's fleet, sleek and deadly, would dwarf this ragtag collection of ships. Soren stepped up beside her. "It's not much," he said quietly, echoing her thoughts. "No, it's not," Alara agreed, "but it'll have to do." She opened a channel to the fleet. The face of Admiral Ken appeared on the screen, his stern features softened by a deep exhaustion. He had been leading the resistance since the war began, orchestrating what little resistance humanity could muster. Ilara had served under him before, during the frontier conflicts, and she trusted him implicitly. "Captain Ilara," Ken said, his voice gravelly. "Glad to see Resolute made it." "We wouldn't miss this, Admiral," Ilara replied. "What's our situation?" Ken's eyes darkened. "It's not good. The Coalition is pushing hard. They've already taken 3 of our outer colonies, and they're moving faster than we anticipated. We need to hit them now, while they're still overextended, or we'll lose our core worlds." Ilara glanced at the fleet again. "Do we have the firepower for that?" Kent shook his head. "Not even close. But we have to try. If we don't stop them here, there won't be anything left to defend." The plan was simple, a direct assault on the Coalition supply lines. If they could cripple their logistics, they might buy enough time for humanity to regroup and fortify its remaining strongholds. But Ilara knew it was a long shot. The Coalition's ships were faster, better armed, and protected by shields that could withstand even the most advanced human weapons. Still, they had no choice. The fleet gathered at the edge of the system, preparing for the jump into Coalition space. The tension aboard Resolute was palpable. Ilara could feel it in every glance, every hurried step, every nervous breath. The crew was on edge, knowing that this could be their last mission. She stood in the center of the command deck, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. The Coalition supply convoy was expected to pass through a nearby system, lightly guarded by a small escort fleet. It was a perfect target. If they could catch it. "All systems ready," Soren reported. His voice was calm, but Ilara could sense the unease beneath it. "Good," she replied. "We jump in 5. The countdown began. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts racing. This was it. The moment they'd been waiting for. The moment that would decide the future of humanity. She had been in countless battles before, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher, the danger greater. "Jump," she ordered. The stars outside the viewport stretched into streaks of light as Resolute, and the rest of the fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel. The sensation was familiar, but Ilara couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gripped her. They were heading into enemy territory, into the heart of the Coalition's domain. There was no turning back now. When they emerged on the other side, the Coalition convoy was right where the intelligence reports had predicted. A dozen massive supply ships, flanked by a handful of smaller warships. It should have been an easy target, but something was wrong. Multiple enemy contacts, closing fast. The tactical officer called out, his voice tight with alarm. Ilara's stomach dropped as she looked at the sensor readouts. The Coalition had anticipated their move. A fleet of warships was already moving in, far larger than the escort they had expected. "It's a trap," Ilara muttered, her mind racing. "They knew we were coming." "Orders, Captain?" Soren asked, his voice betraying a hint of panic. Ilara's mind raced. They couldn't retreat now. They were too deep in enemy space. The Coalition would pick them off one by one if they tried to flee. The only option was to fight. "All hands battle stations," she ordered. "Prepare to engage the enemy." The Resolute surged forward, its weapon systems coming online as the Coalition ships closed in. Bright beams of energy lanced across the void, the first shots of the battle. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the tactical display, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. The Coalition ships were faster and more agile, darting in and out of range, their shields absorbing the human fleet's firepower with ease. But the humans fought back with a ferocity born of desperation, their ships weaving through the enemy formation, returning fire with everything they had. One of the human freighters, repurposed into a makeshift gunship, took a direct hit from a Coalition beam weapon. Its shields flared and then failed, the hull splitting apart in a fiery explosion. Ilara winced but forced herself to focus. There was no time to mourn the dead. "Target their lead ship," she ordered. "We need to break their formation." Resolute's weapons locked onto the nearest Coalition warship, a sleek, angular vessel bristling with weapons. The ship's shields flared as Resolute's pulse cannon struck it, but the alien ship barely slowed. The Coalition ship absorbed the barrage from Resolute like it was little more than a light breeze. Its shield shimmered and held, and then it retaliated. Bright beams of energy lanced out from its hull, and Alara barely had time to shout an order before Resolute shook violently under the impact. The shields flickered, holding, but not for long at this rate. "Shields down to 60%, the tactical officer shouted. Alara gripped the edge of her console. "Evasive maneuvers now." The Resolute banked sharply to port, engines roaring as the ship pulled away from the Coalition warship. But the enemy was relentless. They pursued, keeping up their barrage of energy beams and missiles. Around them, the rest of the human fleet was faring no better. Explosions dotted the starry backdrop as human ships were picked off one by one. It was a slaughter. "We can't keep this up," Soren shouted from his station, his face pale with panic. "Their shields are too strong." Alara clenched her jaw. She knew he was right. The Coalition ships were too advanced, too well protected. They needed a new plan, something that could turn the tide. But the battle was spiraling out of control, and they were running out of time. "Captain," the tactical officer called out again, his voice tight with fear. "We've got more incoming." Alara's eyes snapped to the tactical display. A second wave of Coalition ships was closing in from the rear, cutting off their escape route. Her heart sank. They were trapped. Her mind raced, searching for an answer, a way out. And then it came to her, an idea so reckless, so dangerous, that it might just work. "We're not going to outgun them," Alara said, more to herself than anyone else. "But we can outthink them." Soren turned to her, frowning. "What do you mean?" Alara's eyes locked onto the tactical display, her mind working rapidly. "Their shields are strong, but they're not invincible. If we concentrate all our firepower on one point, we might be able to punch through. But we need a distraction." Soren's eyes widened as he realized what she was suggesting. "You're going to draw them in." Alara nodded grimly. "We'll bait them into focusing on us. The rest of the fleet will hit them from the flanks, concentrate everything they've got on a single ship. If we can take one of them down, the others might pull back." Soren hesitated. "That's incredibly risky, Captain." "I know," Alara replied, "but we're out of options." She tapped into the fleet-wide comms channel. "All ships, this is Captain Alara. We're going to make a push. I need every remaining vessel to concentrate fire on the lead Coalition ship once I give the signal. Resolute will draw their attention." There was a moment of silence on the channel, and then one by one, the captains of the remaining human ships acknowledged the order. Alara could hear the weariness in their voices, the unspoken fear. They knew this was a last-ditch effort. "Soren, take us right at them," Alara ordered, her voice steady now. "Right into their formation?" Soren asked, incredulous. "Right into the teeth of it," she confirmed. The Resolute surged forward, engines flaring as the ship charged toward the Coalition fleet. The enemy warships adjusted their formation, their weapons locked onto the incoming human vessel. Alara felt the weight of their attention shift toward her ship, just as she had hoped. The first barrage hit hard. The Resolute shuddered violently, her shields flaring as they struggled to hold under the relentless assault. Alara gripped her console tighter, her knuckles white. "Shields down to 30%, the tactical officer called out. "Keep pushing," Alara ordered. "We need to buy more time." The Coalition warships were closing in now, their sleek forms slicing through the void with terrifying precision. Alara could see the tactical display lighting up with warnings, but she forced herself to focus. If they could just hold on a little longer. "Now!" Alara shouted. "All ships fire now." On her command, the remaining human ships opened fire. A torrent of missiles, energy beams, and kinetic rounds surged toward the lead Coalition warship. The alien ship's shields flared brightly under the concentrated barrage, struggling to absorb the sudden influx of energy. For a moment, It looked like the shields might hold. And then they collapsed. "Direct hit," the tactical officer yelled, his voice filled with disbelief. Alara didn't waste a second. "Target their weapon systems. Everything we've got." Resolute fired again, joined by the other human ships. The Coalition warship shuddered under the onslaught, explosions rippling along its hull as its weapons and engines were torn apart. In moments, it was crippled, drifting helplessly in space. "We did it," Soren said, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara allowed herself a brief moment of relief, but it was short-lived. The rest of the Coalition fleet had seen what happened, and now they were shifting their focus. The element of surprise was gone, and they were regrouping for another strike. "Admiral Kent to all ships," came a sudden voice over the comms. Alara's heart jumped. Admiral Kent's flagship had been knocked out of the battle earlier, but somehow they were still in the fight. The Admiral's voice was strained but determined. "Regroup at Rally Point Beta," Kent ordered. "We can't hold this position. Fall back and prepare for the next phase." Alara quickly relayed the order to her crew. "Soren, get us out of here. Full burn to the rally point." The Resolute turned sharply, engines roaring as the ship pulled away from the battle. Around them, the other human ships did the same, fleeing the field as the Coalition fleet reformed. They had won a small victory, but the war was far from over. Hours later, the Resolute and the remaining human fleet arrived at the rally point, an asteroid field on the outskirts of the system. The ships settled into position, their crews exhausted but relieved to have survived. Casualty reports began flooding in, and Alara's heart sank as she saw the list of lost vessels. Out of the 50 ships that had begun the assault, only 20 remained. The Coalition had taken heavy damage, but the human fleet had been decimated. They had inflicted a wound, but it wasn't nearly enough to stop the enemy's advance. Alara stood in the war room aboard Resolute, staring at the holographic map of the sector. Admiral Kent appeared on the screen, his face lined with fatigue. "Good work out there, Captain," Kent said, though there was little warmth in his voice. "We took one of their warships out of commission, but it's only a matter of time before they regroup. We've bought ourselves a little breathing room, but not much." Alara nodded. "What's our next move?" Kent sighed. "We're running out of options. The Coalition has the upper hand in every way that matters. We've sent out requests for reinforcements, but we both know that the rest of the fleet is tied up defending the core worlds. We're on our own out here." Alara's eyes drifted back to the star map. The Coalition was relentless, but they had to have a weakness. Every species, every empire, had something they couldn't afford to lose. "Admiral," Alara began slowly, "the Coalition is powerful, but they're not invincible. They're still made up of different factions, different species. What if we could exploit that? What if we could turn them against each other?" Kent frowned. "You're suggesting we provoke a civil war within the Coalition? It's a long shot," Alara admitted, "but it might be our only chance. If we can find a way to drive a wedge between the Coalition's member races, we might be able to weaken them from within." The Admiral was silent for a long moment, considering her words. Finally, he nodded. "It's risky, but you're right. We don't have any better options." Alara straightened. "Then I'll begin gathering intelligence. We'll find their fault lines, and we'll exploit them." Kent nodded again, his expression grim but resolute. "Do it. And Captain, be careful. We're walking a fine line here." Alara gave a curt nod and ended the transmission. She stood in the quiet of the war room, her mind already racing with plans. The Coalition might have the upper hand now, but humanity wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Over the next several days, Resolute and the rest of the fleet regrouped and repaired their ships. The crew worked tirelessly, knowing that every hour counted. There was no telling when the Coalition would return, and when they did, they would come in full force. Alara spent those days poring over intelligence reports, trying to piece together the inner workings of the Coalition. It was a vast and complex alliance, made up of dozens of alien species, each with its own agenda and priorities. Some were more committed to the war than others, and there were rumors of dissent within their ranks. One faction in particular caught her attention: the Drather, a warrior race that had long been the Coalition's enforcers. They were powerful, brutal, and fiercely loyal to their own kind, but one faction in particular caught her attention: the Drather, a warrior race that had long been the Coalition's enforcers. They were powerful, brutal, and fiercely loyal to their own kind, but they had also suffered the most losses in the war against humanity. There were whispers that the Drather were growing weary of the conflict, questioning whether it was worth the cost. If Alara could find a way to exploit that doubt, she might be able to fracture the Coalition from within. Alara called a meeting with her senior officers. They gathered in the war room, the atmosphere tense but focused. Soren sat beside her, his expression grim but determined. The rest of the officers were a mix of seasoned veterans and younger, less experienced crew, all of them tired but resolute. "We need to turn the tide of this war," Alara began, her voice steady. "And the only way we're going to do that is by striking at the Coalition's foundation. We've identified a potential weakness: the Drather. They've been the Coalition's main fighting force, but their losses are mounting, and there are signs of dissent." Soren frowned. "How do we take advantage of that?" "We're going to infiltrate their ranks," Alara said. "We need to plant the idea that this war isn't in their best interest, that the other factions are using them as cannon fodder. If we can get them to question their loyalty to the Coalition, it might be enough to create a rift." One of the junior officers, Lieutenant Varen, spoke up. "But how do we do that? The Drather are notoriously insular. They don't trust outsiders." Alara nodded. "It won't be easy, but we've managed to gather some intel on a Drather leader, General Vocker. He's highly respected within their ranks, and from what we've learned, he's not entirely convinced that the Coalition's leadership has their best interests at heart. If we can get to him, we might be able to sway the Drather." The room was silent for a moment as the officers absorbed her plan. It was risky, incredibly so, but it was also their best shot. Soren leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "So, how do we approach him? We can't exactly just walk into Coalition space and ask for a meeting." Alara gave a tight smile. "No, we can't. But we've intercepted communications indicating that General Vocker will be inspecting a Drather outpost on the edge of Coalition territory in 2 days. That's our window. We'll send a small team to infiltrate the outpost and make contact with him. If we can get him alone, we might be able to convince him that continuing this war is a losing proposition." Varen looked skeptical. "And if he doesn't see things our way?" Alara's expression hardened. "Then we find another way to undermine the Drather. But for now, this is our best shot." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one voiced an objection. They all knew the stakes. 2 days later, Resolute was hiding in the shadow of a barren moon, just outside Drather-controlled space. Alara and her infiltration team, Soren, Varen, and a handful of specially trained operatives, prepared for their mission. They had disguised their small shuttle as a civilian transport, hoping to avoid detection as they made their approach to the Drather outpost. Alara stood in the shuttle's cramped cockpit, watching the Drather outpost grow larger on the view screen. It was a massive, angular structure, carved into the side of a rocky asteroid. Drather ships patrolled the area, their sleek, predatory forms gliding through space like silent sentinels. "We're coming up on the outpost," Soren said from the pilot's seat. "No signs of detection yet. Keep it that way," Alara replied. "The moment we're detected, this mission is over." The shuttle slipped through the Drather patrols, entering the outpost's docking bay without incident. Alara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. So far, so good. Once they docked, Alara and her team disembarked, blending in with the other civilian workers moving through the bay. The Drather paid them little attention. After all, they were just another group of laborers and traders passing through. But Alara's heart pounded in her chest as they made their way deeper into the outpost. They were walking into the heart of enemy territory, and one wrong move could expose them. Varen, carrying a concealed data pad, accessed a nearby terminal, pulling up the outpost security logs. "I've got him," she whispered. "General Valker is in a meeting room on the upper level. He's alone." Elara nodded. "That's our target. Let's move." The team made their way through the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding Drather patrols and security cameras. Finally, they reached the upper level, where a pair of Drather guards stood outside the meeting room's entrance. "Leave them to me," Soren whispered, his hand moving to the stun device at his side. With quick precision, Soren and another operative incapacitated the guards without raising an alarm. The door to the meeting room slid open, and Elara stepped inside. General Valker stood at the far end of the room, his imposing figure silhouetted against the stars visible through the viewport. He turned as they entered, his deep-set eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You're not supposed to be here," Valker growled, his hand moving toward the weapon at his side. Elara raised her hands in a gesture of peace. "We're not here to fight, General. We're here to talk." Valker's eyes flicked between them, clearly wary. "Talk? Humans and Drather have nothing to discuss." "Maybe not," Elara said, keeping her voice calm. "But I think you might want to hear what we have to say." Valker hesitated, but something in Elara's tone seemed to give him pause. He folded his massive arms across his chest. "Speak." Elara stepped forward. "This war isn't in your best interest. You know that. The Coalition is using the Drather as their front-line force, throwing your people into battle while the other factions sit back and reap the benefits. Your warriors are dying for their cause, not yours." Valker's eyes hardened. "We fight because we are strong, because the Coalition has made us stronger. But at what cost?" Elara pressed. "How many more Drather need to die before you realize that the other Coalition members don't care about your losses? They see you as tools, nothing more." Valker's expression flickered with something. Doubt, perhaps, or anger. Elara seized the moment. "You've lost more warriors in this war than any other Coalition race," she continued. "And for what? To destroy a species that's done nothing but defend itself? The Coalition says we're a threat, but the truth is, they fear us. They fear what humanity could become." Valker was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You think we should abandon the Coalition, turn against our allies? I think you should do what's best for your people," Elara said softly. "And I don't think dying in a war that isn't yours is in their best interest." The Drather general looked at her, his eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I will consider your words, human. But know this. If you're lying, if this is some trick, I will hunt you down myself." Elara inclined her head. "I understand. The mission had been a success." But as Resolute left Drather space and returned to human territory, Elara knew that their work was far from over. General Valker's doubts might be the key to turning the Drather against the Coalition, but it would take time to see the results. For now, humanity had bought itself a sliver of hope. The war was far from won, but for the first time, Elara felt that victory, however distant, was possible. The Coalition was strong, but it was not invincible. And with every step, every mission, every sacrifice, humanity was getting closer to finding the cracks in the armor of their enemies. As Elara stood on the bridge of Resolute, staring out at the stars, she allowed herself a small smile. They had taken the first step. The rest of the war still lay ahead, but they were no longer fighting alone. And so, the battle for the future of humanity continued, with alliances shifting, betrayals looming, and the hope that, through ingenuity and determination, humanity might survive against overwhelming odds. The stars, once a vast frontier, were now the stage for a war that would determine the fate of more than one species. And Elara knew that the end was still far from sight.